Good afternoon, dear colleagues, students, teachers. For people watching us on the stream on Facebook and YouTube, welcome to the third day of Baltic Summer School of Digital Humanities. Students here in the classroom and on Zoom already have a very intensive day of workshops behind them. Good job, everyone, first of all. And we have something a little bit relaxing planned for the end of the day. And so with great pleasure, I welcome Raivis Vilūns with a lecture with a little bit provocative title, There is no journalism without data journalism. Raivis Vilūns is a lecturer at the University of Latvia. He has worked in various Latvian media outlets for more than 10 years. Vilūns has covered a wide range of topics from feature stories about science and history to investigative analytical reporting about municipality governance and political events. Now he works for the most read news website in Latvia, Delfi.lv, where he writes about business, economics, and the financial world. Vilūns is the author of weekly satirical webcomic published in the Delfi business. When not writing or drawing, he is working on his doctoral thesis about online media and journalism in Latvia. Welcome.
Thank you. Yes, now we are working. Okay, so thank you for the introduction. It was very scary to hear those words all together like that, but yes. So this lecture is going to be, like Anda said, a little bit different, a little bit more hopefully relaxing. I will try to entertain you a little bit talking about data journalism. So here we go. Yes, so in general, we have to start probably from what is data journalism. And there are like a million different definitions, million different explanations. You can choose any random journalistic handbook or literature or a guide or whatever, and you will find very, very various definitions, but basically it's something along these lines that I have written here, that data journalism is, or data-driven journalism, is a form of journalism that is based on analyzing, filtering, comparing, explaining data sets for the purpose of creating or improving media material. So basically taking everything you have listened about in the previous days, and you will, I guess, listen tomorrow as well, and using that to create some form of a journalistic material or improving it, because that is the core of my topic today. There is no journalism without data journalism, because I strongly believe that any good journalistic material that is not a simple news story like Prime Minister said X and Y, President said this and that, has to have, or most likely is better off with some form of additional data added to it. So here is just one random example of a classic data journalistic report. I really like that there is a map, there is numbers, there is dates, and so on and so forth, and plus it's all in a GIF format. It makes for a really, really nice small picture. So basically that is a good example. In general, that report of Afghanistan from Al Jazeera, we can say what we want about Al Jazeera, but in general, sometimes they have really nice data visualizations. So basically, this is the good example. There are, in that story that is here, there are a lot of different ways they have visualized the data, but basically a map with data, numbers, so on and so forth. A classic example. This is like a regular common example. that we more often, and I in my work we use, it's basically like we just take one or two data sets, for example, for a longer time period, like this is for interest rates of loans, and we just put them in a graph. We use pie charts, we use bars or lines and so on. A very basic example, and because it is one of the core ideas of journalism, and journalism, especially these days in online environment, is to explain ideas or concepts or data in a very quickly understandable format. And of course, imagine this graph, if it would be like an Excel sheet with numbers, date number, date number, date number. It would be so much harder for a person to understand it. So that is one of the, that's why it's a common example. It is quick and easy to do. So, here is journalism with data that is not data journalism. For those who can't read Latvian, do not read Latvian, it's basically just a national news agency report about how many people participated in local municipal elections. And that is, I wouldn't call it data journalism, because there are just numbers about people who voted, people who didn't vote, who didn't participate. And that is not really what we would call data journalism. But if, for example, National News Agency or any other media taking this news story, they could add information about the past 2, 3, or 4 elections cycles, and put them, like, for example, in a chart or a graph, how many people participated in 2018, how many people participated in 2014, and so on and so forth, added like a little small graph to it. Now it's basically data journalism in some form. So why there is no journalism without data journalism? Because in theory, there are million different ways how to classify journalistic genre, how to refer to different formats. If you open most popular handbooks, especially older handbooks, like from, I don't know, 2014 or something, and then there would be this division. There would be like investigative journalism, sports journalism, entertainment journalism, and data journalism as another way of doing journalism, another type of journalism, which I think these days really is not actual. It's not really applicable to the reality, because everything around us is data. Everything we post online can be used as data. Everything that is in computer, in digital space, can be in some form of fashion made into data. And basically any type of journalism can use data journalistic approaches and data journalist tools to show information and to make the information maybe a bit better, or so on and so forth. And yeah, because we live in this multimedia world where journalists need to know more skills than before. Like if we talk about 19th century, for example, basically the skill set of a journalist was to be able to interview a person, to write up an interview or a story. Basically the most common skill that you needed as a journalist was the ability to write and ability to speak with people, to structure information. But now, these days in a multimedia world, journalists need to do, and it becomes more and more often, more and more common, that journalists need to know how to write, how to film, how to take pictures, how to post stuff online, how to make social media content, and working with data. That is also another big thing that is becoming more and more popular, because every type of journalism every type of journalistic material can be improved with data. And editorial newsrooms, they of course want the materials to be as best as they can. So in general, they are also asking for journalists to be able to at least use like the basic tools of data journalism. At least, like I said, just take 2 rows in Excel, 2 numbers, 2 number columns, and just put them into a graph that people can easily understand. And yeah, and like I said, we live in a world where almost everything has become data. Like, for example, this is this datification, which is not even a particularly new term. It is at least 10 years old, because everything that we post online, like on social media, can be quantified in some form or fashion, can be analyzed. Like I don't know, the simplest way would be, let's take a prime minister's tweets, for example. Prime Minister has one tweet. It's not much of a data set. It's not much of a thing to use for a data journalist. A regular journalist could use that Prime Minister's tweet to develop a story, to ask questions. But if we use the data approach, we probably need, let's say, 10 Prime Minister's tweets. And then we can use whatever we want to find out, what is our approach, but we can try to find some sort of a form of a data in those tweets. Like, for example, that would be less of a journalistic approach, but more of a language scholar's approach, a political communications analyst approach. But we could analyze what language the Prime Minister uses in his tweets. Does he use I, or does he use we decided, I decided, and so on and so forth, for example. But you can always try to find a journalistic story in that as well, if you are so inclined. That maybe won't be like an investigative story, but there is always room for that. And that's just one example. Basically, everything that is online can be turned into a data that we could possibly maybe later use for journalistic efforts as well. And yes, and why do we need it? To give context. For example, the example I like to use why data journalism is good and useful is that, for example, you can have like a really, really, really good, heartbreaking interview with, let's say, a person who has suffered domestic abuse, a person who has suffered from violence. You have an interview. They open up, they tell a really heartbreaking story. You write it up, you publish it, and it is really, really good. But what people, especially in these days in online environment, what they would say? They would say, oh, this is just one case. We here in Latvia, we don't have problems with domestic abuse. It's just one case, right? We have all seen that somewhere online. Okay, we find another woman, man, child who has suffered. We write another interview. We write another story. People say, oh, okay, these are just 2 cases. We don't have a problem with domestic violence in Latvia. But if we take the data sets from police, from crisis centers, about how many people report abuse, how many people have left their families and went to the crisis centers, how many, we have a lot of data about how many women have died because of domestic abuse. We use that, we add that to the story, we have context. And of course, there always will be people on Twitter who will say, no, 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 we don't have a problem. But majority of people who will actually take the time to read your story, they will understand, oh, okay, I guess we do have a problem. And that is why data journalism can really, really improve stories. Also, we can go from the other way. We can use data journalism data sets to find stories. We can look on, and I have examples later in the presentation, we can look on like, I don't know, even we can take the same, like how many people have reported domestic abuse. We can look at that data and we can see that, oh, okay, for example, in the last couple of years, I don't know, I haven't looked at that data, but let's imagine that for the last couple of years, the reports of abuse have grown, and then we can create a story from that. We can ask experts from crisis centers, doctors, police, people who have suffered from violence. We can try to find out why is it happening, why domestic violence is becoming more and more common. Or maybe people are just reporting it more. And that is another question. So another thing, we can look at issues from other angles. For example, we could take some form of a data. For example, I don't know, people talk about poverty in Latvia, and we can use that data set to ask maybe questions that we have not previously asked. We can use multiple data sets, for example, the poverty in Latvia, and maybe we can, I don't know if that data exists actually, but if we can find data about people who live below the poverty line and their education, for example, we can use these two data sets to analyze. Is it true what is commonly accepted, that people with lower education are those who are at risk with poverty? Maybe it is so, maybe it isn't, but data can help us to do that, to find correlations. Yeah, that's just a basic explanation. We can find some correlations between what is going on with, for example, unemployment rates together with people leaving Latvia, going to live to another European Union or, for example, Great Britain. We can use those two data sets to compare and see if, in the years where we have higher unemployment rates, do people decide to leave Latvia and go to work to other countries? We remember that in 2008 and later on, when we had financial crisis, that correlation was really there, that as the higher the unemployment rates grew, the more people left Latvia. And of course, combat false narratives. That is one of the super important things, because the data helps us to there always will be people who don't believe, who say that it is not true, this is lies, fake news, and so on and so forth. But if we have some form of data points, then we can hope that our readers, viewers will believe us in some way. And that's the same, what I gave the example of domestic abuse and domestic violence. That's the same. If people are spreading the story that we don't have a problem here in Latvia, we can use data to show that maybe we do. And at this point, I would like to stress that what I am saying here, it's basically about data journalism and about journalism, but I think these approaches and in general the way of thinking can be used also not for journalism only. I think at least that's what I try to say to students at university when I talk about data journalism and data-driven stuff, that you can use these approaches in your other areas of work. You can use data to, for example, you are working in public relations or wherever, you can use this to tell stories, because this is not exclusive to journalism. But yeah, let's go back to the fake news and propaganda. Some time ago, the Belarusian president Lukashenko said that Latvians are standing on line by the border to buy buckwheat and salt. obviously, yes, you are shaking your head. You know that that is fake news because we live here, we have the context, we know that people are not starving, that we have salt and buckwheat. Local people know that. But let's imagine that a foreign news agency wants to know, or any other, I don't know, European Commission wants to know what is going on with buckwheat and salt situation in Latvia. And what can we do? One, you could say the qualitative approach would be just to drive to the border and film and take photographs that there are no people standing on the Latvian border asking for buckwheat and salt from Lukashenko. We can prove that in that way, but we can also use data-driven approach, and we can, for example, take data about the consumption of buckwheat and salt, the import, the export numbers. We can ask retail sellers, biggest shop chains like Rimi and Maxima, do they experience lack of salt or buckwheat? Are people buying it more, so on and so forth. We can ask the wholesale sellers, the importers, are they importing more buckwheat? Are people suddenly afraid that we won't have enough buckwheat, for example? And we have these data points to disprove what the president of Belarus said. Of course, I mean, our information probably will not go to Belarus, and they will probably believe what the president said, if there are people who still believe him. But here in Latvia and on the other side, like to the Western Europe, we can use these data points to say, well, that is not true, that it is not a problem. So, and I think this is a very useful example, and this is a very simple example why data can be useful, even in situations where, like, you feel that everyone who is living in Latvia, everyone knows and understands that that is fake news. But it is useful to use these tools because you never know when people are going to look for that information, especially on Google and everything. And it is always useful to combat disinformation in this type of a way. And yeah, so finding or improving the story. So basically, like I previously mentioned, we have these two ways we can use data-driven approaches. We can use the data to find the story, or we can use the data to improve our story. And I have like an examples. So from data to story, like we have the change in consumer prices here from our statistics bureau, and yeah, what stories we could write based on this data set? Any?
Products are increasing in price like steeper or quicker than services.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, exactly. That is a completely good and completely valid article to write, especially in my, like in Delphi Business, we could actually write about this and ask economical experts and try to find out why this is such a big disparity in that. And also we can just like use this data set to tell a story about that everything is becoming more and more expensive, and we can always include this in our, for example, political reporting if we want, and we can ask politicians what is your plan if this data set shows us that the increase is very rapid. We can speculate that in the next half of a year the increase will continue, and so what is your plan? And that is the way we can find the story from the data. And Yes, so here is the other direction. So here is a soft, what would traditionally be called a soft story, a soft feature, in a sense soft that it is not political news or social political news. A soft story, a very personal story about a person who got sick with tuberculosis, and her experiences, the shame she felt because she had this stigma that is a disease that only prisoners and homeless people get, and so on and so forth. And yeah, and this is a story that could be, I don't know if it needs to be improved, because there is always a place for personal stories without any additional data. But if we wanted to, we could expand this. For example, here we can use the data from disease center, and we can look about the increase or decrease in times people have got sick, how many people are getting sick, and we can then go and, for example, see that the disease is in decline in general, but we can ask, like, for example, medical experts and so on and so forth, why, for example, what are the places where you can get sick, and why, for example, this young person who apparently is not homeless got sick, and so on and so forth. There are like a million different ways we could improve it with different data. We can always compare it with other similar diseases to tuberculosis. We can compare Latvian data to, let's say, European data, the world data, and see what is going on. If we want to do that, that's not necessarily that we need to do it, because people often do like to just read the personal focused story, and it's not necessarily needed. But if for some reason you are making like a larger story, a media project, for example, on this disease, you can always expand it in many multiple ways. So how to get data? That is like probably in the previous days, and tomorrow you will probably learn and have already learned about how to get data, but here are like some of the ways and some of the examples of how journalists usually get their data, and it's probably, as well as everything else, it's applicable to other fields that you represent and where you work and where you study. So official data from governing or overseeing bodies, we can, like, here is an example, official institution data, European Commission on gas prices, for example. So basically, this is already written up, but European Commission, Eurostat, and a lot of different official institutions publish their data on the increase or decrease of gas prices, for example. And that is one of the ways where we can look for the data. We can use the data to find stories or to improve our stories. So that is like a really clear and good example. So there is, of course, non-governmental organizations, non-profit organizations that also work in various different fields that collect information, collect data. Oftentimes they have way better data sets and way better data and more easily accessible data, because actually those organizations want to share that data with journalists and so on and so forth. Like here is an example of children health in Afghanistan, and yeah, and of course these illustrations, they are more like a text, more of a written up story, but usually you can get with these organizations, you can also get their data in open data format, or maybe they have already analyzed it. They have maybe made some charts and graphs and so on and so forth, and you can use that data secondhand, or you can of course ask these institutions, because they are always quite happy to share with journalists their data on issues and so on and so forth. And that is another way where we can find stories, or we can improve our stories. So of course there is there is a growing community of data enthusiasts. We have in Latvia, we have Datu Skola, which is not like super active right now, but in general there is a small community even here in Latvia of people who are interested in data. It is their hobby. They like to look at the data. They like to visualize their data. They like I have even, like as a journalist, have asked for help from people from that community, because I am not a programmer. I don't have these skills. So sometimes I have asked for their help, and yeah, and this is like this is maybe not like the best example of data enthusiasts, because these genealogy DNA tests, you know, that they are super popular in the United States of America. People give them as gifts, so you can find out what is your ancestry and so on and so forth. And they are kind of expensive, but they are super popular in America. And sometimes a lot of that data go online, or are accessible online in some form of fashion, and data enthusiasts can use that. Like in this example, they help to solve a murder, but there are like a lot of different examples. Like in Latvia, oftentimes people will publish some correlations of voting, like for example parliamentary voting. They will correlate what certain politicians or certain parties have, in what ways they have voted in the last year or in the last 4 years, and so on and so forth. And that is a really, really important help for journalists, because especially here in Latvia, we are very small editorial rooms. We don't have dedicated data journalists. Like, for example, in the large media, like, I don't know, Washington Post, New York Times, and so on and so forth, they have people who are kind of sort of dedicated. They are data journalists, and they mostly work with the various data sets, and they look for stories there. But there is always some risk to it. But yeah, here in Latvia, like I said previously, we live in this multimedia age, where convergence age, where journalists need to know a lot of different skills. But I mean, learning to program is very, very hard. I have tried a couple of times, but I have not succeeded for now. Maybe someday to get data out of internet. So these communities are really good, and we have a couple of times we have these hackathons. I think like COVID kind of killed that, but before COVID, the Data School regularly created hackathons where data enthusiasts, journalists, and other people could work together to find interesting data, and that is really, really valuable. Okay, social media platforms, like that is, like I already mentioned, that is a huge set of data. Of course, we all know about how Facebook used their user data and so on and so forth, but there is a lot of data you can gain access to it. For example, from Twitter, you can use their APIs to get data, write programs, and get data out of their services, public data, of course, that is not private data. And you can use that to analyze stuff. Like, for example, here is a good example of how in United States, of course, again, the Democrats more likely to mention politics than centrists or people who are more on the right. For example, we could do something like that in Latvia. Of course, in Latvian we have this problem that our language is small and automated readers are not very good, at least for now, with our language. Plus, it's harder to analyze it. But there could be like some approaches. If you could get the data out, maybe you could create some sort of a keyword finder that could analyze what, for example, Latvian Twitter people are saying and so on. And that is also an interesting way. And there is, like in social media, there is this huge amount of data. For example, on Instagram is very popular for analyzing, especially from brand creators and influencer agencies and marketing agencies. They use a lot of tools, automated tools that gather information from Instagram, for example, to find out what are the trends, what pictures, for example, get more likes, get more engagement. Like there are stories that they even analyze the angles of the face. Like, for example, if you look to the left or look to the right, which one is more successful and which will gather more likes and so on and so forth. That, of course, is marketing research and so on. That's not maybe very applicable to journalism. Plus, media does not have that money that marketing and talent agencies do, especially in the West, so we can't do it. But in general, just as an example to show that social media is like full of data that we can use. Of course, yeah, automated data gathering, as I understand your previous workshop was basically about that, how you can scrape the data to use various tools, and that is like a completely, totally valid way. It's really good, and my prediction is that in the next 10 years, a lot more of journalists and in journalistic schools and universities will learn more about these ways of gathering data, because right now at this point there are a lot of tools that don't require you to know any programming languages or any coding ability. You just need to have some little experience, a common sense, and maybe some form of understanding how the data on the internet is collected, and you can do it. Like, for example, here is an older example. What year is that? I can't read it, but it's quite old, 16 or something. Yeah, this is like my story for journal SESDI, and and this was created in collaboration with data enthusiasts, with Latvian data enthusiasts. They helped me to, we met through hackathon, and they helped me to gather data about how politicians have voted in the, I can't remember what was the period, but in general how they have voted and what political parties and what politicians most often intersect, like how they vote on certain issues, like for example. And like we know that, for example, National Alliance and Saskaņa Harmony will probably vote similarly on like LGBT issues. Like, for example, they will be against it. That's like common. And so we use this data approach to just see what are the topics, where do people toe the party line, and where do they differentiate from it, and so on and so forth. And yeah, I could not, at that time, I could not do it myself. Now, like 6 years later, I think these open access tools and automated tools are simple enough that I might be able to do it myself. Now, I have not actually checked, but I think it can be done. And if we talk about data scraping and so on, I just saw the end of your last workshop, but basically there are good add-ons tools for web browsers as well of data scraping, where you can download at least simple tables from the websites and so on and so forth with little you just have to press like 2 buttons or something. So it's very easy and very, very nice. So, and of course, if we talk about data journalism, we must mention investigative journalism, of course, because those things usually work together already. There is no huge divide between data journalistic, data-driven approach and investigative journalism. And probably in the last years, the most famous one, this is already a bit old, but still, Panama Papers, where huge amounts of data were leaked from the banks, where rich and wealthy of the world keep their money, and the journalists of the world, Latvian journalists from the Baltic also worked on those stories, and they could find where did the money went, what was secreted, and so on and so forth. And that is, yeah, like the leak part is not because you need to find the person, or the person needs to find you who is willing to leak those data, but afterwards working with that, because that was a huge data set. You can now even, I think, go to the Panama Papers website. I think they have these connection graphs where you can click on different people and how they connect with other people and so on and so forth. And even now, like years later, it is still a good tool to use. I know from like, I don't know, I think The Economist or something recently even mentioned it, that they have used it in their reporting, or Washington, no, I think it was Washington Post. They used these Panama Papers trails because the information is still there, and it is like a really, really interesting example. So, and of course, the last one is crowdsource data to build maps or like any other data. This is like, probably in Latvia, this is the best example. This is like quite old. It's from Rebaltica, when they, I think it's 10 years old or something, when they asked for people to send in their utility bills, and then these utility bills were posted on an online map where people could click and see that, for example, maybe their neighbor is paying way less for heating or hot water than they are, and so on and so forth. This was like a really, really good example because it actually worked. If I remember correctly, there were some institutional changes that came out of this, and it is like probably the best example of crowdsource here in Latvia. There were some issues, like for example, I was one of the students that was putting the information in manually because you had to, because people sent in their bills, either it was electronic or maybe they took photos, but those bills were very different. You couldn't really automate the data collection to the map, so you had, so we students had to do work here. We had to read those bills and input information in the certain lines. And here is one of the problems why crowdsourcing is bad in this type of way. If you have very various data types that come in very various formats, and you have people that manually input them, there is a large room for errors. We had errors, like, for example, I made a bunch of mistakes because, you know, if you do this like 100 times, you input numbers in Windows like 100 times, there's bound to be human errors. So that is one of the problems with crowdsourcing, of course. But in general, this was a really, really good example, and it brought some changes. So how to visualize the data? That would be like probably another week of workshops, like to even scratch the surface, because visualizing data is a science in its own, and I wouldn't imagine that I could be able to explain it, because I don't think I am that good at it as well. But in general, the basic idea, of course, is that readability, any way, shape your data takes, it should be easily read. It should be very, very easily to understand, like colors and clarity. If you use too many colors, like for example this little graph I have here, it does not look good. Okay, it is a screenshot from one of those where you can scroll in, and then it becomes better and the connections are more useful, but if you zoom out, it doesn't look really good, so there would not be any point of this data. So, and simplicity as well, you have to, in journalism and in like public relations and anywhere, one of the important things is you have to think about simplicity. If you have to make the important information easy to understand, and that's the same with any form of data. Of course, if you like, if you would make some complicated 3D maps with like 100 different colors and everything, people really don't want to use it. And yeah, and by the way, there are more and more research that shows that people I really do not like even interactive data tools. If we talk about journalistic news content, they want to just see, if you are saying the prices have gone up, they want to see a graph where they see, okay, the price of apples has gone up. They really don't want to click on 7 different things. They don't want to do that. Of course, there are exceptions, like for example, the Panama Papers or any really interesting things. There is going to be some part of society, some data enthusiasts that will engage with your tools, but in general there are more and more academic studies that show that people just want a simple picture, maybe a GIF. That's like what I started at the presentation beginning, a map that changes a little bit slowly so they can follow the changes, they can see what has changed, and they don't really want to engage, they don't want to press a million different buttons and so on and so forth. So, and of course relevance. There sometimes it's not that often, because of course we have journalists in general have a lot of work to do, and we don't have a lot of time often. So but there are sometimes temptations to use a lot of different data sets to show this graph, to show this graph, to show that pie chart, to use this and that, and then the story becomes complicated, and some of the graphs may not be too relevant. Maybe you could just bypass it by writing one sentence, like, I don't know, the price of the apples has tripled. You can always ask the question, do I really need to show the price of the apples in 10 years range if I'm writing about vegetables in general? For example, if the whole article is only about apples in Latvia, then maybe that's relevant. But if you are writing about fruits and vegetables and produce in general, then maybe it's not that important. Like always, you need to think about relevance. But it's the same for the academic papers. If you write your bachelor's, master's, or doctoral thesis and so on and so forth, it's always the question of how useful it is for my reader. And yeah, journalists don't have time, so the solutions are quite simple and not always the best. We could, that is actual truth, that sometimes we could make it better, but sometimes we just don't have the time. And yeah, the most common tools we use, infogram is in black, because right now it's like, it's the simplest and the fastest way to visualize very different ways of data, and I use it almost like not not daily, but basically every week, because it's really simple to take I don't know, the price of Bitcoin, the price of other cryptos, and just take it from online traders who archive this information and copy into Infogram, and then there it just is. But of course there are a lot of like different tools and ways to visualize it, and sometimes even pen and paper. And I have a really nice example. So here is, I really like this example. At the end of the presentation, I have one really nice book that is freely accessible, and that everyone who is a little bit interested in data and data journalism can read. And this example comes from that book. Basically, it is a story about the I have now forgotten what country, South American country, about the issues with water accessibility. There is a huge problem there, of course, and in a lot of different places. So basically what they did was a journalist, a comic book artist, and a programmer, they took a trip to that region. I think it was in Peru, but I am afraid of lying. They took a trip to that region, they collected data, journalists did interviews, wrote up what he saw, and the comic book artist made a story, basically a clickable interactive story where you go from panel to panel and it explains the story in a visual way. It is very interesting. Like here is the link. You can just visit it afterwards and just look at it. It's a very good and novel way to you show data and tell the story without writing paragraphs and paragraphs. But like I said, it is very cool and it is novel, but there are a lot of research that show that if they would just write a simple article, more people would read it actually, because people are lazy, and if they are not super interested in that, or they are not super interested in comic book art, then they probably will not use that tool. But nobody says that you can't publish like a regular article and do this as well. And this is like a really fun way to use data. Here is just a quite simple visualization that can be used to show the different timelines. Here are world leaders and how long they have been in power, and this is like a really nice way to show in relation one to another. Like for example, we can see how many leaders in Turkey had changed, while for example Korea or other countries had leaders that stayed in power for quite a lot longer. And that is just like also a pretty good way to visualize. And we could adapt this to, we could take our parliament, our Saima politicians, and we could see who are the ones who are the longest in the parliament. I think Urbanovic from Saskaņa is the longest one now. I think he was the second one, but now, well, probably after the elections, he will be the one who is who was from the beginning, and we could do this. I mean, of course, if we put like 100 faces there, then that might not work. Maybe we should just use those people who have been at least in 3 different parliaments and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's just like a nice way, and you can do that with a lot of different things where you have to show the relation of time. How I don't know how long. I don't know, comparing Samsung Android phone to iPhones, and what's the difference between announcing new models of the tech or whatever. You can do that. So, and here is food and wine. What comes, what pairs well with what type of a wine. This is not a very particularly hard piece of journalistic, but like I said, data journalism can be used in any form of journalism, any form of journalistic content, and this approach can work in food or entertainment or whatever type of a journalistic genre you want to call it, and this is also like a quite nice and elegant way to portray what type of wine can be paired with what type of a food, for example, and it works really nicely. It's very elegant and you can use it. And yeah, here is a bit, this is not a journalistic, this not comes from a journalistic outlet, but still it's not that great of an example of visualization of data, and maybe you can tell me why. Maybe somebody notices.
The numbers are not that different as the chart suggests.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, you saw it. Oh, yeah, right. Oh, yeah. Right. Then you are very bored now. But yeah, so basically this is one of the examples, and this is like a very often we see this type of mistake. It's not even like I don't think that this is like that they meant to do it. It's just they wanted to visualize and they wanted to show that there is an increase, and they just didn't think that they are actually spreading misinformation in some form, because people, as we talked about, people are lazy, and people do not always spend time to look at the numbers. We can see that yeah, in 2010-11 there were 43,000 nurses, and a year later they had 46. So there is a tiny amount, only 3,000 increase, which is like how many percentage? It's not even 5%. So basically, to accurately show the two last bars, you would have to make them only slightly bit taller than the rest. But of course, they wanted to show that they are making progress, and so on and so forth. But yeah, that's like a really, really common mistake that people often do, especially when they are making hand-drawn illustrations. Like, for example, in Infogram or any other automated tools, it is harder to do this because you have to change parameters to do this, but you can do this easily with hand-drawn illustrations. And we have seen these examples in Latvia as well, and it happens a lot, and that's not great. And here is an example what I said about simplicity and colors and whatnot. So basically here is the map of United States of America, and then there are 3 additional maps that explain what the big map means, but you actually have to look at the small maps to get any context to understand from the big map. It's basically like super complicated and not very useful. If it was clickable and you could click on each of the little colored squares and they would give you some form of information, then maybe, but in general, like we already talked about, people are a bit lazy and they will probably not do this, and this is like a classic example of a really nice looking visualization that really does not do anything. It does not help anybody. And yeah, and so basically I'm at the end of my speaking part, and here is the book I mentioned, and in general this address, if you want to get inspired or just want to read about like really good examples. This book is like super good. Oh, there is a little bit of visual problem, but you can read the title. And the book is really, really interesting because it shows a lot of different examples of data journalism and in general how data can be used. And yeah, and it's freely accessible. It's a publicly funded project, so everybody can download that book, and they have a previous book as well that really, really, if you are interested in data gathering and working with data, there is a lot of really, really good examples. And every chapter in that book is like super short. I give it to read to my students because, well, you know, students are not really into reading long articles, and it's like super good. Every chapter is like 3 pages, and they tell with really good examples how data journalism can be used and applied in the real world. So that is it for me. Maybe there are some questions or?
Hello. Definitely there will be questions. We will be roasting you now. So you painted the picture that seemed too optimistic to some of us also in the chat. But I will start with the first question that is written in the chat in Zoom. Could you please name those web scraping tools you are using?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of them from the top of my head, it's actually just called Data Scraper. It is accessible as a Firefox and, if I'm not mistaken, Google Chrome add-on. You just have to look in the add-on store. They are free. And then there is Data Miner. There are there are actually about 10 different ones, but these are the 2 that I have used in the past years. And they are good for, I will not lie, they do not work perfectly for complicated tables and complicated data sets, but for, like, if you just for some reason can't copy paste the data out of a simple online table or something like that, these add-ons are pretty good, and they get the data out, and it is very easily usable and very easily manageable, because sometimes the data can come out mangled or without separation, and or everything will be just copied in one Excel cell, and then you have to separate it. But if there are these simple tables, then these tools can get it out. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. I have a complex question from Michaela. Listen carefully. Okay. So, but it's even a 2-part question, I guess. But let's see it. I'm curious. What is your take on how accessible it is to harvest data? Is there an issue when it comes to the actual propagation of fake news or heavily skewed data interpretations that get disseminated to the rest of the world? How do you think we might combat that? This is a wide question, but specifically in the context of the accessibility of data, is there an ethical argument for gatekeeping in those cases, or should gatekeeping only be instigated when there is an issue of privacy being infringed upon?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is that all? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so I will start from the end. Well, I mean, the gatekeeping is not really possible in general at this point, because as we discussed, the data scraping tools and in general all of the tools are becoming more and more accessible, so really we can't keep those data away from the hands of people who want to use it in a bad way, or they want to skew that data for their own means, except of course from locking everyone out of that data, and then we will return in for example, if we take Latvia here, we will return in the past like 10 or 15 years ago, where if you wanted specific data, you had to do manual requests with pen and paper, basically go to a statistics bureau or governmental institution, write why do you need the data, and so on and so forth. And that is like, that I think does more harm to journalists and people who are data enthusiasts and who are working than it helps, plus because there is also a cost for it. Like, for example, in Latvia here, for a very long time, the registry for businesses, what's the name of it in English? Well, where you register your business and where you hand in all the data, who is the beneficiary of the business and so on and so forth, was only accessible if you paid money. You had to use the service Ursoft or Firmas LV, and you had to pay money to access that data. But like in the, I don't remember, is it 3 or 4 years, now we have in the data registry, you can access most of the data about any firm registered in Latvia for free. And I think that is like a really, really good way. It's really positive because Latvian journalists are not very wealthy. Our media rooms, we do not have like huge amounts of money, so making as much of the data publicly accessible that is not protected by, of course, state secrets or privacy issues, it is really, really good. And I think we get more good out of it than bad. That would be my question. Did I answer everything, or was there the first part that I forgot?
I don't know. I guess your idea was that there really is not that much of gatekeeping, but another matter is the issue of the skewed or fake information.
Yeah,
I guess
like
probably like I don't think that you disagree that there's more evidence on database information in the world and also more untrue information, including information that claims to be evidence-based. I think it would be irresponsible to ask you if you think that nowadays there are more fake information or disingenuous information compared to 40 years ago, or are we like on the same level? Just there's a lot more of all kinds of information, or is it going to the right direction or to the wrong direction?
Yeah, I think that in general, yeah, there is more information in general, and the information is more easily accessible. So that means more people can skew it and misuse it. So yeah, I would say that there's probably in total more disinformation, but there is also more good information. And I think that the journalistic community, especially in the last like 8 years or 10 years since the fake news term and propaganda has always been important, but the fake news thing, we have really a lot of, especially the large world media have mobilized, and there are basically almost in every large media room, there are people who are dedicated to combating fake news, who are dedicated to fact-checking. There are services, there are media who do basically only fact-checking, like American Snopes, for example. I don't know if you can call it a media, but in general. So I think the bad information, there is a lot of more bad information, but I think as time goes on, we are getting better at combating it. Even with automated tools, there are more and more tools that actually can find information that is fake in some sort of form and block it or pause it for a certain time before a human can check it over and so on. I think in the COVID years we saw like good advances in that actually. So I think we are. I have a positive view of this.
Oh, you are optimistic. So,
Yeah.
I've heard opinion that like fact checking doesn't work anymore because people don't trust fact checkers. They don't believe, and they don't want to believe evidence-based or data-based information. So, what do you suggest? How to persuade people to trust media?
Oh, I don't think that we can do that because in general I don't believe that there are more people who do not trust media. I think the people who do not trust are just louder. Their voices get amplified because of social media, and I think in general the collective amount of percentage of population that do not trust media is probably around the same as it has probably been for, I don't know, last 50 or 60 years. But I think that we just need to work. We just need to work. We can't really do anything more than we are doing now to reach people who have decided that they do not want to be reached. We can just keep on doing what we are doing, and maybe in time in some form it will get to them, or maybe if not, well, nothing is 100%. Unfortunately, there will never, in my opinion, there will never be a time when 100% of population will trust in the media, because media makes mistakes. Also, there are some precedents when people have made mistakes, and yeah.
Are there questions?
Yeah, I have a question on. I have a question on this topic. So going back to the beginning of your presentation, you spoke about how before database journalism, you would write an article and someone would read it, and it's sort of a single story, right? Mm-hmm. You interview a person, and then from that up, the reader might draw the conclusion that there is one such case, about whatever topic that the article is on. However, when you have database journalism, you could have thousands of cases covered in one article by using statistics. So there is a new level of authority that is ascribed to journalism and media outlets with database journalism. Mm-hmm. Right now, I'm not reading an article about a single person or a couple of people that have been interviewed. I'm reading an article, and through data, it gives me the perspective that, this is the case across the board. This is the case in the country amongst all of this whole population. And so do you think that from an institutional perspective, media outlets or journals or magazines, they are capable of handling this new authority? For example, if you think about authority in terms of who has the authority? Lawmaking institutions, the police, and there are institutional checks and balances to make sure that people are being held responsible, right? So if a police officer makes a mistake, he's held as responsible, same as a judge or a lawyer. Mm-hmm. But when you think about journalists, how are they being held responsible if they do misrepresent data, or they, they perpetuate fake news and so forth? Do you think that journals and I mean, in a general level, they are capable of handling this new authority that comes with database journalism?
That is a super interesting question, actually. But yeah, and it would be a super good research in university, actually. I really like that question. But to answer, I think I actually don't think that for individual reader and for the society in general that this one case or 1,000 cases make such a big difference, in a sense that if a person trusts the media, then he can be misled by just the story of one case, and he can be misled by the story of 1,000 cases, right? And I think the guiding lines or guardrails, what we have in place are, that is a really hard question. They are the same. Yeah, you are absolutely right, because I think, at least I gathered from your question, that you are saying that we have the same guardrails as we had before, but now we have more, let's say, power, right? Something like that. And yeah, that is, but on the other hand, there are media ethics commissions. There are, of course, laws about spreading misinformation, and there are more and more laws in work, but we can't really go too far with this, because then it becomes restricting what media can write, and that's like a super slippery slope that we can like see in our large neighbor. It's like perfectly we can see what happens in a society and country where you take the liberties of media one by one away, and now you can't even say the word war. It's like people lose their jobs, they get to prison. But if we talk about democratic societies and in general, then I think our guardrails now, they are still working in a sense. And like I said before, I believe that the amount of people who do not trust, or they decide that they want to trust, for example, if we talk about, I don't know, United States of America, they want to trust Fox News or one of the even more extreme right-wing media who purposefully even misrepresent the data, then there's really not a lot of things we could do, but in American context. Here in Europe, we actually have stricter laws. At least I'm not a scholar of media law, so I might just spread misinformation right now. But as far as I have read and I have understand that here we have stricter laws that you can always apply to and say that this information is bad. And I think the responsible media will always retract information. They will change, and those who are not responsible, well, yeah, but I would not advocate for stricter laws because I think that just brings more and more censorship, and that is not that great. But I think the key is internal ethics or internal commissions that work either in one media, where there are people who look and check the data, or if there are complaints, they talk with a journalist, or are there like professional ones? Because here in Latvia we have like quite recently a new institution that does that. They don't have like an actual power, but I mean, in the sphere of public information, maybe saying that this journalist is spreading fake news is almost a punishment. But yeah, like I said, your question is super good, and it should be a full-blown research. I really like it.
I wonder, in the education of journalists, how this conceptual problem is treated. How do you differentiate between truth, untruth, and opinion, viewpoint? Because of course reality is the same for us, but not always the notions of truthfulness are even applicable. There are opinions, beliefs, values of people. How in the educational process do you try to explain to students how to tell apart what is not corresponding to reality or untrue, and what is related to your values and beliefs?
Well, that is also a good question, and a big problem actually, because that is one thing that I have seen that has I don't have an explanation why, but it has become worse in general in society and also in the student environment, that people are getting worse at understanding what is an opinion and what is facts that are based on data or on reality, and that has become harder and harder. Even in the in the class that we both teach together, I had some the papers sent in that were based on opinions, not on facts, and so on and so forth. And that is a big issue. But I think that in education and in educating journalists, it is one of those things that you just have to start from the first class about journalism that they get. You have to show with examples, basically. I think at this point we have to show it with examples that the person on TikTok saying that they do not like this and that is an opinion. But statistics that show that, for example, 70% of people in Latvia do not like potatoes. I'm lying, people in Latvia like potatoes, but let's imagine. And you just have to show with examples, there is no other way. And I think that's for the media literacy in general in society. I would not say the cure, but the way to educate is just showing examples. This good, this bad, this good, this bad. Because other more complicated explanations, they, at least in my experience, they do not work. You have to start with basics.
Are there questions from the room? I have a very last question from me. You were mentioning various literacies that have added to the reading and writing and interviewing skills. Do you think that journalism education provides enough help for advancing these new literacies, or even if you think that higher education shouldn't be responsible for this, that maybe these new literacy skills should have been taught earlier?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, in University of Latvia, we are trying. Like in the when I started my bachelor's degree, it was 12 years ago. We did not have almost anything that was with these new types of literacies. We had only one class on photojournalism, and there was a little bit something about filming and editing, but very small amounts. But now it is getting better. And I see that all over the Europe that universities are responding to the demand in the workplace, that they are offering more and more classes about how to take a better picture, for example, how to film, how to edit. We don't have, like in University of Latvia, we don't have data journalism as such. We should. And hopefully we will, but for now we don't. But other universities all over Europe, they are offering, if it's not like a even separate like a module, then that's at least one class or one course in the year where you can learn about that. And yeah, and I think it should start with universities. Of course, editorial rooms should also, the employer should also add something. And I can say from my workplace, we do have sometimes our local internal classes about how to take a better picture. Our photo editor just collects volunteers who want to learn about this thing, and they have we have a couple of hours one day when he shows how to make a better scene, how to do lighting properly, and so on. And I think it's 50-50, but it should probably start with university. But one good thing is that overall, young people who are using TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat, and whatever, they are learning these literacies from a very young age. They instinctively know what they are doing, and they can take a pretty good picture with their phone already. So it happens already, like before even getting to university level.
Yes, I just was about to ask if you are receiving TikTok video tutoring from your employer or the university.
No, TikTok, no. We have not yet advanced that far, but we have been talking about Photoshop and design programs and learning a little bit about those, because when you work in an online media, sometimes you don't have time to ask for the design people or photo people to do like little edits to the picture or crop the picture and so on and so forth. And this autumn we will have like a small class of that. So maybe we'll go to TikTok soon as well.
Yeah, but are you dedicated employees who manage social media?
Yes, we have. People, yeah. In Delphi, we have people who work only on social media. In other smaller newsrooms, like when I worked for Diana, then we did it ourselves. We had one social media person, but we did it ourselves, most of the posting, and that was, and of course that takes away from your main job, and it's better if, of course, the more people, the better.
Okay, so if no one wants to add anything, I will say thank you to our lecturer. Give a round of applause.
Thank you.
And everyone have a great evening, and summer school people, see you tomorrow.
Thank you.